Hi, my name is Jim Terrell. I'm the founder of Quick Blade Paddles. I've pretty much been paddling my whole life. My dad made a canoe paddle for me when I was 3 years old, and that's what got me started into canoeing. We grew up on a small river that ran into the Ohio River just outside of Cincinnati, and I got hooked on flatwater sprint canoeing and was fortunate enough to be on the national team for 15 years, and I went to 4 Olympic Games from 1984 to 1996. I've since then applied some of what I learned from sprint canoeing to stand-up surf paddling now. I just brought 2 boards with me today. The first board here, this blue one, is a 12'6" stock racing board. The board is designed to cut through the water. It's pushing the water out of the way and letting the water come back together. And you want the least disturbance as possible, yet still having enough width to balance yourself. One of the more important things to really establish before you even talk about technique is hand position and foot position on the board. You'll see a lot of people that paddle with their hands too far apart, or more commonly, too close together. A general rule of thumb for me is when you put the paddle on top of your head, you want your elbows to be at a 90-degree angle. To me, this is the most powerful position for a stroke. Depending on how your board is designed, your stance is really important. You want to have your feet at about shoulder width apart. Having one foot just a little bit ahead of the other helps give you that extra balance you need from a front to back. I've been designing paddles my whole life, and there's 4 things that I consider when I design a paddle. The number 1 thing is the catch, how efficiently the paddle enters the water. 2, how well it holds onto the water, which is the power phase of the stroke. The 3rd is the exit, how clean the paddle comes out of the water efficiently without a lot of drag. And the 4th thing is the recovery of the paddle on the return. The paddle has to be balanced well and weighted well to make a nice efficient recovery, which is the 4th phase of the stroke. The catch is when you set your blade, the motion should be down, get a nice deep blade before you pull back. Don't think about pulling the paddle through the water, think about pulling yourself past the paddle blade. The power phase is the most important part of the stroke because that's what is driving you forward. When you reach ahead, you want to have your bottom arms relatively straight, and you want to reach by twisting your shoulders. When the paddle gets to your feet, you want to think about getting the paddle out of the water. I have a little bit of a trick that I teach for the exit, which uses gravity in your favor. To take the paddle out of the water, what I like to do is just take my top hand when I get to the end of my stroke and just drop it. When you just drop the top hand, the blade comes out without really having to move your bottom hand much at all. And that's how you exit. The last phase of the stroke is the recovery. On the recovery, you want your blade face pointing down so that you actually knife your blade through the air on the recovery. Particularly in a headwind, you'll find yourself get faster by that. Okay, what I'm going to show you now is some techniques for turning and maneuvering your board. The key to this is getting your body weight low. Just step back to the tail, bend your knees. I like to get really low so I can get the paddle horizontal. The lower you are, plant the paddle, and you do a nice sweep. You can really get around in just a stroke or 2. Stay in your surf stance, get the paddle out, catch the wave. The next thing I want to talk about is overall paddle length. For the most part, you want to paddle about 9 to 10 inches over your height. If you're doing a lot of surfing, you may tend to want to go a little shorter. For racing, if you have particularly a thicker board where you may stand taller and you have a more upright posture when you paddle, you may go with a paddle as long as 1 foot taller than your height. Paddle blade size is like the gears on your bike. It really comes down to a few things: how strong you are, the way you paddle, how you're going to use your paddle, the distance that you're going to be paddling, and it's also personal preference. We make a couple different styles of shafts. Some are light and stiff, some have some flex to them. This particular shaft is the pre-preg carbon tube, which is very stiff, very light, and it's the preferred shaft for racing. It doesn't absorb as much power. The other thing that's nice about a round shaft is a lot of people travel with their paddles, and it's much more functional to make a 2-piece paddle with a round tube. We offer a few different types of grips. The most popular is the P50 model. The P stands for palm, the 50 stands for the angle of what I call the canter of the grip, which allows your wrist to stay in a natural straight position when you grip the paddle. This blade, if you notice, is at a 10-degree angle to the shaft. And what this does is it puts the blade in a much more powerful position, what I call a positive angle. When the paddle is most efficient is when it's at 90 degrees in the water or at a positive angle. And the reason for that is the more forward angle you have on your blade and the more vertical it is in the water, you get the forces to drive the board forward, or you're able to actually drive the blade down, and when you're pulling on this, we'll actually be able to get some of the weight off of the board, which makes the board glide and run better. The subtle details are really everything when you're trying to get an edge, particularly in racing or in competition. You know, there are a lot of good paddles out there and a lot of different designs, but we've spent years testing a lot of different types of designs and equipment to really dial in those things that make a paddle work just that much better than another paddle out there. With some of these tips that I've given you today, hopefully that will help you get a little bit more comfortable on your board, a little bit faster. So remember, train hard, go fast, and have fun.